They have no genuine love for the country. They only seek power and pelf, although they give you a lot of promises. People vote like sheep and cattle. 2 lakh Yadav vote, 2 lakh Dalit vote, 2 lakh Muslim vote, 2 lakh Jat vote, 2 lakh Kulmi vote. My single vote means nothing. There are 5 lakh applications, many of them PhD, MSc, MTech, engineer, begging for a PN's job. Who is getting the fruits of their GDP votes? Is it the Indian people or just a handful of big businessmen? This further question nobody asks. There is a secret iron rule among the developed countries that underdeveloped countries must not be allowed to become developed countries. Some operate on emphasizing religion, some operate emphasizing caste and all. But this is their level. Freedom of speech, equality and so on. But what does all this mean to a man who is poor, who is hungry, who is unemployed? Many people in India met me and asked me whom should they vote for in the coming parliamentary elections of 2024. And as you know, I'm a very blunt and straightforward person. And I said that whichever thug you like, you vote for. Because they're all thugs. All these political parties and almost all these political leaders, they are nothing but a set of scoundrels, rogues, rascals, looters, deceivers, gangsters, mafia type. They have no genuine love for the country. They only seek power and pelf, although they give you a lot of promises. All kinds of promises before elections will be given, but nothing will be kept. So therefore, I have no faith in these elections. I have no faith in this kind of democracy, parliamentary democracy. I have never voted in my life and I will never vote because my vote means nothing. People vote like sheep and cattle. 2 lakh Yadav vote, 2 lakh Dalit vote, 2 lakh Muslim vote, 2 lakh Jat vote, 2 lakh Kulmi vote. My single vote means nothing. So why should I waste my time when my vote means nothing? And see, people, 90% people, I'm not saying 100%, but 90% people in India, they do not see the merit of the candidate, whether he's a good man, bad man, educated, uneducated, criminal, non-criminal. They just see his caste and religion or the caste and religion of the political party which that candidate belongs to. So now casteism and communalism are feudal forces which have to be destroyed if India has to progress. But parliamentary democracy further entrenches them because it runs on that basis. So how can the country progress with parliamentary democracy? We have to devise some alternative system under which India can progress rapidly and rapidly industrialize. And for that, to create such an alternative system will not be easy. It can only be through a mighty, historical, united people's struggle, rising above caste and religion, and led by modern-minded leaders who are determined to rapidly modernize and industrialize the country and give the people a high standard of living by setting up a political and social order based on justice, giving good lives, prosperity to all our people. But that is going to take time. You see, presently, our society is lying polarized. What I see is people, they are divided on religious lines, caste lines. It's going to take a lot of time. Now, how will that powerful historical movement arise which can create a country of prosperity? Now, how will that people's struggle arise? How much time will it take to achieve success? How will it be conducted? Who will be the leaders, modern-minded leaders who will be leading it? All this nobody can tell. You cannot be rigid about historical forms. But this is bound to take place, although it is going to take time. And that is the only way out for our country. Otherwise, we will remain condemned to living in poverty and massive unemployment, massive malnourishment, lack of health care for our masses, and so on. Presently, see, the situation in India today is that every second child in India is malnourished. He's stunted, wasted. You go on Google and see Global Hunger Index. India has dropped from position number 101 to position number 107 out of 121 countries studied. We are behind neighboring countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal. So, all this talk that India is fastest growing economy and GDP growing. See, when every second child is malnourished, when there's massive unemployment, if there are 100 government PN's job, Chaprasi job advertised, there are 5 lakh applications, many of them PhD, MSc, MTech, engineer, begging for a PN's job. This is the reality. And to talk of India shining and fastest growing economy and GDP growth. See, it is not enough to say, assuming there is GDP growth, it is not enough to say that. The next question which arises is, who is getting the fruits of that GDP growth? Is it the Indian people or just a handful of big businessmen? This further question nobody asks. So to talk of GDP growth and all, which of course the figures themselves are very questionable, but even if they are correct, it means nothing for the people. It is just benefiting a handful of very rich people and they are getting richer. I want to tell you something very, very important. And this you must understand because nobody in the world has expressed this idea. See, this world is really two worlds. On this earth, there are two worlds, which is not one world. One is the world of the developed countries, which means North America, Europe, Australia, Japan, even China has joined their ranks now. And the other is the world of the underdeveloped countries, to which India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, other Asian countries, African countries, Latin American countries, etc. belong. There is a secret iron rule among the developed countries that underdeveloped countries must not be allowed to become developed countries. Why? Because if they do, then with their cheap labor, they will undersell the goods of the developed countries. See, here you must understand economics. And you permit me to go a little deeper into this. The cost of labor is a big chunk of the total cost of production. Like there's a factory producing some goods. Now, the cost of labor will be a big chunk of the total cost of production in that factory. And if the cost of labor is less, then the cost of production will be less. And if the cost of production is less, you can sell your goods at a cheaper price and undersell your business rival. There's competition in the market. One businessman eliminates another businessman, not with bombs or guns or swords or tanks, but by underselling him, which means selling the same high quality goods but at a cheaper price. Now, let me give you a historical example. China had a revolution in 1949. Before that, China was a very poor country. 95% Chinese were poor peasants living in horrible poverty. But after 1949, the leaders who came to power in China set up a massive industrial base. Now, that massive industrial base, coupled with the cheap labor available in China, enabled the Chinese to undersell the whole world in consumer goods and even in some other kinds of goods like telecom sector, etc. If you go to any American supermarket or European supermarket, you will find it packed with Chinese goods because the Chinese will make the same high quality goods which the American manufacturer can make, but at half the price because Chinese labor is cheap. You see, everything turns on the cost of labor once you set up a massive industrial base. Countries which have cheap labor have a distinct advantage over countries which have expensive labor. Once you set up a huge industrial base. Now, Indian labor is even cheaper than Chinese labor. If we set up a huge industry in India, for which we have all the potential, we have got thousands of very bright engineers and technicians and so on. Our engineers, IT engineers are manning Silicon Valley. If you go to American universities, you will find large number of Indian professors of science, engineering, mathematics, and so on. I've met many of them. So we have a huge pool of technical talent. In 15, 20 years, we can transform India into a highly industrialized country. But if that happens, will the Western industries be able to survive? One, China has created a headache for the West. If India, which is even a bigger competitor because we have cheaper labor, if we become highly industrialized, will the Western industries be able to survive? Can they face the competition? Because with our cheap labor, we will sell goods at even less than half the price at which the Western manufacturer can manufacture. So the industries will not survive and millions of their youth will be thrown out of employment. Will they easily permit that? No, they will fight it tooth and nail. So how do they fight it? How do they prevent industrialization of India? They do it by making Indians fight each other in the name of religion, caste, language, race, etc. This partition of 1947 was for the same purpose, to keep India backward, to keep Hindus and Muslims fighting each other. The same divide and rule policy. So as to ensure that India does not become a highly industrialized country. Now, therefore, the interest of the developed countries is that underdeveloped countries, particularly India, must not be allowed to become a developed country. Whereas our interest is that we must become an industrialized country. Because unless we do so, we can never abolish poverty and unemployment and malnutrition, lack of health care, etc. You see, you require a huge amount of money for even building a primary school. Where will all this money come from? It comes from a huge modern industry. So we must develop a huge industry and make India an industrial giant. But if we do that, as I said, then Western industries will collapse. So our interest directly conflicts with the interests of the developed countries. They will fight tooth and nail to prevent us from becoming developed. All our politicians, including leaders of all parties, whether BJP, whether Congress and all, they are nothing but puppets of the developed country. Some operate on emphasizing religion, some operate emphasizing caste and all, but this is their level. They are all of them are puppets of the developed country. If you go to a puppet show, you will see the puppets moving around and you will think they are moving of their own volition. But in fact, they are not moving of their own volition. They are controlled by the puppeteer who is hidden behind a screen. He is moving these puppets through some very thin strings. But you are not able to see the puppeteer. So similarly, these developed countries, you will not see. You will see the local politicians fighting each other and so on. But those who are operating these politicians, the local politicians of underdeveloped countries, they are invisible. You can't see them, but you can understand by using your common sense and reason. They are these developed countries who don't want underdeveloped countries to become developed countries. Now, how will we resolve this contradiction between developed countries and underdeveloped countries? To my mind, the only way to resolve it is by launching a massive historical people struggle which rises above caste and religion, where people are all united and led by modern-minded leaders who are determined to create a system, political and social system, in which people get high standard of living and decent lives. Now, when will that historical people struggle begin? How long will it last? how it will be conducted, who will be those modern-minded leaders leading it. All this no one can tell. One cannot be rigid about historical forms. But that is bound to happen because that is the only way out. The alternative is to remain in poverty and with hunger and unemployment and so on. So therefore, a historical struggle will be created, but it is going to take time. It's not going to be easy. As I said, the developed countries will fight tooth and nail to oppose India or other underdeveloped countries from becoming developed countries. Presently, many people say, "Oh, India has the fastest growing economy and there's GDP growth and so on." See, assuming even first of all, these statistics are very questionable. But assuming there's GDP growth in India, the question which has to be asked is who is getting the fruits of that GDP growth? Is it the Indian people or just a handful of big businessmen like Adani, Ambani, and so on? Who is getting the fruits of this? If the people were getting, there would not be every second child in India malnourished, and there would not be such massive unemployment and poverty. So obviously, even assuming there is GDP growth, it is not benefiting the Indian people, but just a handful of big businessmen who are getting richer and richer. So that is not solving any basic problem in India. We have, of course, a constitution which gives us fundamental rights like liberty and freedom of speech, equality, and so on. But what does all this mean to a man who is poor, who is hungry, who is unemployed? Does it mean anything? It means nothing. I may tell you, in January 1944, the then US President Franklin Roosevelt gave a very important speech called the Second Bill of Rights. You can see it on Google and YouTube. Just type President Roosevelt, the Second Bill of Rights, in which President Franklin Roosevelt said that although we have a Bill of Rights in the US Constitution, which is on which basis the Indian Fundamental Rights chapter was made, which provided for equality and freedom of speech and liberty and so on. But President Roosevelt said that these mean nothing to people who are poor, who are hungry, unemployed, uneducated. So therefore he said there must be a second Bill of Rights. This present Bill of Rights in the US Constitution is clearly insufficient to give decent lives to people. You have to have a second Bill of Rights providing for employment, providing for nutritious food, providing for housing, providing for health care to every American citizen. Now, similarly in India, we have a fundamental rights chapter, but these are just political and civil rights which mean nothing to people who are poor and hungry and so on. So we have to create a social and political order where everybody gets decent lives and high standard of living. There's one thing I want to tell you, which is very important. We have, as I said, a huge pool of technical talent, thousands of very bright engineers, technicians, scientists, and so on. Secondly, we have huge natural resources. India is not a small country like England or Japan. It's almost a subcontinent. So we can easily develop a high level of industry. But the problem is that our people don't have purchasing power. You see, the goods which you produce must also be sold. But how can they be sold when people are so poor, they don't even have money to buy food? Even food prices have become so expensive. How will they buy industrial goods? So how can you develop a high level of industry? Because what you produce in those industries will not be sold because people don't have purchasing power to buy those goods. So you have to address this problem, how to raise the purchasing power of the masses. Now, let me tell you how it was done in one case. In Soviet Union, as you know, there was a revolution in 1917. But the real industrialization of Soviet Union began with the adoption of the first 5-year plan in 1928. Now, after that, the central government used to fix prices of all commodities. Uh, the methodology adopted by the government was that every 2 years or so, they would reduce prices of food, of clothing, various items by 5 to 10%. Every 2 years, they would reduce prices of commodities by 5 to 10%. Regularly, they kept on doing it. Now, when you reduce prices, then with the same wage, the worker can buy more goods because goods are becoming cheaper. You see, wage is relevant to the price index. If the prices are going down, the real wage is going up, even if nominally you are getting the same wage, but in reality you are getting higher wages because goods are becoming cheaper. So this way the domestic market was expanded by regularly reducing prices. Every 2 years they would reduce it by 5 to 10%. Sometimes every 2 years they would also raise wages by 5 to 10%. But even with the same wage, the real wage is going up, so the domestic market is expanding. See, you have to basically depend on the domestic market because reliance on foreign markets is very precarious. It may be cut off by some other power, or there may be a recession in that foreign country, and then your goods will not be sold, your factories will close down. So you have to, for stability, you have to basically rely on the domestic market. And we have a huge population of 1.4 billion people, so a huge domestic market. But our people's purchasing power has to be raised so that when we step up industrial production, which we must, those goods can also be sold. So how do you raise the purchasing power of the masses is one central issue which has to be addressed. I'm not saying that you must follow the same method adopted by the Soviet Union. You can find out your own method. But you have to find out some ways of raising the purchasing power of the masses, because otherwise, if you increase production, the goods will not be sold. There will be a glut. So that will be useless. After all, you can't eat machinery, you have to sell it. Therefore, though people have to use their creativity. See, unfortunately, our so-called intellectuals in India are pseudo-intellectuals. They don't know the real problems, what to say of thinking of how to solve the real problems. These professors of economics, some well got PhD from Harvard or Yale or London School of Economics. But to my mind, they're all superficial. There's nothing in their heads. You ask them, how will you solve the problem of unemployment in India? Not one of them can give a correct answer. They don't know. I'm not impressed by your PhDs from Harvard or Yale or London School of Economics. The point is, what do you have in this head of yours? So therefore, the few genuine intellectuals have to think out ways and means of solving the basic problems of our people, which is the problem of poverty, unemployment, malnutrition, and lack of health care. You go to hospital, what is the state of health care in our country? Poor people can hardly afford any health care. You go to All India Medical Institute, which is one of the premier medical facilities in the country. It looks like a railway station. There are thousands of people sitting there, nobody caring for them. For hours and days, they keep sitting, waiting. There's nobody to attend to them. This is the condition of the top medical facility in India. There are no doubt some private hospitals, Apollo and Max and Mendicity, so on, JP, but they are extremely expensive. The common man can't afford going there. And so far as the government hospitals are concerned, they are in a horrible condition. They don't have facilities, hardly any good doctor and so on. So there's almost total absence of proper healthcare in our country. Educational institutions, see the schools. Leave aside the IITs and all. Otherwise, they go to the school in villages. Nobody cares for them. Terrible state of affairs. So we have to uh, create a political and social system which will of course be created after a historical struggle. And then we have to uh, build up a mighty economy in which all our people get decent lives. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take, my guess is 15, 20 years of hard struggle in which tremendous sacrifices will have to be made. Because there are powerful forces which will oppose this transformation of India from an underdeveloped country to a highly industrialized country. So we have to combat those forces. Presently, one of the situations in the world is that there are two superpowers which are opposing each other, hostile to each other. One is the USA and the other is China. The place of USSR has been taken over by China because USSR, as you know, collapsed in 1990. But China has come up, become a big power, not as big as USA, but still coming up to it. Their economy, I think, is 5 or 6 times the Indian economy. Now, I have written an article, you can see it on Google, that biggest danger to the world today is Chinese imperialism. Why? See, in the 1930s and early 40s, the biggest danger in the world was Hitler's imperialism. It was not British or French imperialism. Because Hitler's imperialism was expanding, and aggressive imperialism. He wanted to conquer other countries. Whereas the British and French were defensive. They only wanted to hold on to their colonies, but they did not want to conquer other countries. So the greater danger to the world was Hitler, not British and French. Similarly, today the Chinese, they are expanding imperialism. They are not socialist. They call themselves socialist, but actually they are imperialists. What happened was they, as I told you, with their cheap labor, they sold a huge amount of goods, and they have accumulated about $3.4 trillion foreign exchange reserve. That is a huge amount of money hungrily looking for avenues for investment abroad. You see, when a country has reached a certain level of industrialization, its domestic market is saturated, so it must seek markets abroad. Like for instance, why did the Britain come to India? Not for a picnic, not for enjoying themselves, but because they wanted markets for the growing British industry and raw materials and so on. That is the nature of imperialism. So Chinese are imperialists today. With their huge amount of foreign exchange, they are seeking avenues for investment all over the world. So we conclude here. Please subscribe and please give your comments. I'm eagerly wishing to hear from you. You are free to criticize me, but politely. I never mind polite criticism. Please feel free to criticize me if you don't agree to anything which I have said. Maybe about something I have said was not correct. I'm a human being. I also make mistakes. And if you give me logical arguments to convince me that I was wrong, well, I'll be happy to hear that, and I may change my views. I have an open mind. So please feel free to criticize me if you wish to. And the Katju team will engage with you. See you all, and thank you for coming here. Thank you.